Hello, my name's David Roth and a very warm welcome to the web seminar for the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017. In today's broadcast, we're going to cover how the brands are valued, unveil the number one, uncover the fastest risers and new entrants as we count down the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017. Exclusive interviews with Sir Martin Sorrell and Eric Salama, CEO and Chairman of Kantar. Explore what's happening in the brand categories and markets around the world. Take a look at the highlights from WPP's DNA of Tomorrow's marketing event in New York. And BrandZ's Top 100 Most Valuable Chinese Brands 2017 launch in Beijing. We'll take a deep dive into the Chinese and Latin American brand market. Learn about brands in Cuba. Discuss this year's hot brand building trends with Lindsay Patterson, Tamara Ingram and Kate Ward, plus hear from some of the CMOs of brands around the world. You'll also be able to find out how to get more information, download the entire report and get access to our mobile apps and presentation charts. Plus a lot more. So sit down, turn up the volume as you watch live the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017 launch broadcast. Hello, we've got an amazing amount to cover in a relatively short period of time. I'm David Roth from WPP and it's my pleasure to present the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017 web broadcast live from our studio here in London. A very warm welcome to all of you and thank you very much indeed for watching. If you want to ask a question during the broadcast, please feel free, just email me or send a tweet to the email address you see on the screen. Well, let's get started, and with me in the studio now is Elspeth Chung. Elspeth is the Global Valuation Director for Kantar Millward Brown on the BrandZ project. Elspeth, thank you very much indeed.
Hi, David.
We've already got quite a few pre-questions, and quite a lot of those are centred around how do we actually go about the process of valuation. So it's probably a very good place to start.
Yeah. Maybe let me first start what is BrandZ, because a lot of people, when they think about BrandZ, the first thing that will come to mind is brand value ranking. But in fact, BrandZ has a lot more than just brand value ranking. So over the years, since 1998, we have been going out talking to consumers about their perception of brands around the world. And all these are the very, very valuable consumer insight that will fit into your brand valuations. So for our BrandZ valuations, our BrandZ rankings, it's not just about one number. We can also tell you what's happened to your brand, how did it get to where it is now, and what you should do next with your brand. And this is also what makes BrandZ the most superior and most authoritative brand value ranking in the world.
Now, you take the elements of the BrandZ data in terms of understanding how consumers relate to the brands and take financial values and create a brand value. Explain a little bit about that process.
Right. So in our BrandZ brand valuation framework, we mainly consider two components. First of all, financial value. So in dollar terms, what is the value that a brand could bring to its brand owner? The second component, which is also the most important component from the BrandZ research, is a brand's ability to increase volume, sales volume, and to charge premium. And that's powered by our BrandZ research. So the two together, financial value and brand contribution, forms what we call the brand value. And this is also the basis of how we rank our brands in the brand value ranking.
Now, clearly from what you've said, brand contribution is a highly significant number and element that makes up the overall brand value. Right. Explain a little bit about why that's so important.
Right. So from our 12 years of global ranking, so we started to do it in 2006. what we observed is brands with high brand contribution could grow their brand more and also faster. And a very important point is also for the brands which are weak and which have a low brand contribution index, what we find is for those brands, they tend to have a negative impact on the brand performance, brand value performance, as well as business performance. So actually that's a direct impact on the brand owner who doesn't really put a lot of effort in nurturing their brand.
Now, our brand valuations, your brand valuations, obviously need to match up, or it's interesting to look at what the impact of a brand's value is in terms of its share price, the market valuation, I suppose, of the brand. What do we see when we look at our strong brands in our top 100 versus the market indices?
Right, so what has happened to us since the first year we launched our ranking, 2006, we have been tracking the share price performance of our strong brands in the BrandZ portfolio. And what we find is if we invested $100 in the first year, we would get a return of almost $125 today. And that's 50% higher than what S&P 500 could get to its average investor. And that's very exceptional shareholders return. So what we can prove from BrandZ is that marketing, brand building is not a cost, it's not an expense. It's an investment in an asset that would generate considerable financial return to its owners.
So building strong brands, investing in brands delivers superior shareholder value. Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, Sir Martin Sorrell, CEO of WPP, is a hard man to pin down. He's always travelling one country or another almost every single day, but I managed to find him at WPP in London. I had a far-reaching conversation with him regarding brands, the economic environment, and what's on his agenda and WPP's agenda for the future. Let's hear what Sir Martin Sorrell had to say. Well, Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Gosh, grief. Time flies.
And time does fly, because this time last year, David Cameron was the Prime Minister of the UK.
Yeah.
The smart money was on Britain remaining in the EU, and that Hillary Clinton would be the
smart
Prime
money
Minister.
or dumb money?
Well, clearly it turned out to be dumb money.
It was dumb money,
So
dumb judgments.
what happened?
Well, the judgments were wrong, weren't they? We were sort of sitting in a bubble talking to one another, David, instead of probably doing our proper research. Maybe the samples were wrong. You know, the East Coast Liberals were talking to the East Coast Liberals, and the West Coast Liberals were talking to West Coast Liberals. And London was, well, it wasn't the South East, because the South East by and large voted for Brexit. But the intelligentsia, so-called, in the UK were talking to one another, and they clearly misread the mood, misread the sort of anti-globalization, if that's the right way of putting it, populist feeling that still exists, and it'd be interesting to see what happens in the UK election. Here we are on the cusp of the polls are tightening as we speak. I think somebody said to me it was down to six percentage points between Conservative and Labour. So Jeremy Corbyn might be Prime Minister.
Well, in the context of that then, how do you see the world's economic tectonic plates and the impact for business decision making? Because clearly things are changing.
World economic growth is slow. Inflation is low, although there's clearly inflation growing in the UK because of the weakness of the pound post-Brexit. When we might get more inflation if President Trump implements his tax plans in America. But by and large, there's very little inflation, very little pricing power as a result, and therefore clients are very focused on costs. So for the advertising and marketing services industry, I think it's totally wrong. The investment in branding is not as strong as it should be. And I should add investment in innovation and branding, because I think the key to long-term growth and successful long-term strategies is innovation and brand. And we know from the data that you do at BrandZ or BrandZ, that we do at BAV and elsewhere, that investing in innovation and investing in branding, it accelerates total shareholder return and share prices, and that the strongest brands are the ones that do best against an S&P 500 or an MSCI.
Given the context of that, one of the things clearly we do when we value brands is have a good look at the balance sheet. There's an inordinate amount of cash on those
relatively
companies'
unleveraged
balance sheet.
Yeah.
Given that, why is there such shareholder activization at the moment?
Cheap money.
And what implications does that
cheap money,
have to us?
No, cheap money. It's as simple as that, I think. Warren Buffett, I remember at the Microsoft conference, said, he never thought in his he would see in his lifetime ability to borrow 30-year money at such a low rate, and you could buy baked beans and tomato ketchup, and that grows or tends to grow year by year. So it's the cost of money is so low, and interest rates have remained lower longer than people projected, and I think a lot of people believe they'll stay lower longer than people think. I mean, they will rise, but they're not going to rise as much as people thought, and it's going to take a longer time for them to rise. I mean, we've seen with the Fed at the moment, there's some suggestion that some of the data they're seeing is not quite as enthusiasm-making for raising rates as before, and that people would be very worried about choking off continued growth. So I think the cheap money is driving. So there are three forces: technological disruption, activist investors, and zero-based budgeting, which is very focused on costs. Those are the three forces. The last two, activist and zero-based budgeting, I think are driven to a large extent by cheap money. And as long as that persists, you're going to continue to see the pressure. There's also, we've had a long cycle since 2009. We're seeing a lot of M&A activity, probably because people have run out of opportunities. They're seeing slow growth, and they run out of opportunities to cut costs, so they need another beast to get their teeth into.
Tomorrow is the WPP annual general shareholder meeting.
Yes.
Here in London.
Right.
When you address the meeting, what direction will you be saying WPP is going in, and also the direction of the marketing industry worldwide?
Well, four strategic objectives for us: horizontality, to get just as we brought BrandZ or BrandZ and BAV together. Horizontality, working together. Not against one another, but working together for the benefit of clients. That what clients want is the best integrated response to their needs, or their opportunities and their challenges. Secondly, the growing importance of digital, which is already 40% of our business, and we want it to be even more, and you won't be able to distinguish it in short order between analog and digital. Fast growth markets, 30% of our business. We want it to be about the same as digital.
And you're still bullish about fast growth markets?
Absolutely, because the next billion, it's very simple. The next billion consumers are not going to come from the US and Western Europe. And whatever is happening to multinational companies, and some interesting articles recently about whether multinational companies are as profitable as they used to be, whether they're growing as fast as they used to be. I mean, a lot of that's to do with currency, the strength of the dollar. But it's also to do with the fact that the BRICS and Next 11 slowed, although they, when we look at the Next 11 in our case, we'd still see significant growth and in fact a pickup. But of the BRICS, India is the only one which is continuing to rev along, and even that demonetization has checked a little bit of it. But the BRICS and Next 11 are going to supply that next billion consumers. So, my view, you need increased focus on that. And then the final point is data, which is 25% of our business, or quantitative disciplines, about half of our business, and that's right. So, more from WPP on that, and we'll be featuring particularly the horizontality part of that at the AGM. But generally, to stress this message that investment, what people call capex rather than opex. I mean, there's tremendous pressure on operating expenditure and operating costs, and that has resulted in very little investment capex. In fact, if you plot investment as a portion of GDP, pretty much, whichever of the mature countries you look at, whether you look at the US or the UK or France, Germany, Italy, Spain, it's been on a downward track since the 80s. I mean, it's recovered since the recession of a deep recession of 2009. But essentially, the animal spirits are dull. The S&P 500 is effectively shrinking because they're paying back more than 100% of their earnings to investors in the forms of dividends and buybacks. That's effectively saying we are abrogating responsibility for reinvestment of the profits we make into the business and giving it to the shareholders to decide what they do with it. I think that's wrong. And the irony of all that is that the companies that take the long-term view are the control companies, the ones that tend to offend the corporate governance wonks who, one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, which we could all agree with, that's democracy. But on the other hand, if you're worried about being turfed out for having taken too much risk or make a mistake, I mean, for every 2 successes, you would hope you'd only have 1 failure. And you've got to take some risks.
If you look at the BrandZ top 100 most valuable global brands 12 years ago when you were responsible for starting the notion of doing this, compared to today, what are your biggest
I was frustrated
observations?
that one of our competitors seemed to have a monopoly on brand. Now we have the superior technique by far. They just do some sort of panel of experts, maybe modified with a little bit of data. We have this very sophisticated measurement of not just brand metrics but financial metrics. And now I think we've established, well, you've and your crew have established, Doreen and everybody else have established BrandZ or BrandZ as the market leader, but we have to make it even more famous.
We're putting together BrandZ and BAV together. You might say about time to taking longer than you wanted it to happen.
It is about time. It's taken a long time, like pulling teeth.
What advantage do you think that's going to give both the group and, I suppose, more importantly, our clients?
Well, I mean, if we look at the branding survey this year, which is our 12th, right?
12th year, yeah.
The fearsome 5, as we call them, top it. So we have Google and Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook are all topping the list.
Of course, most of those 12 years ago
didn't exist.
And
the 5 that were at the top 12 years ago employed a lot more people, which raises all sorts of social issues going back to where we started. But putting BAV together with BrandZ or BrandZ, I think gives us even more clout in the brand valuation space, and also deals with what I think is the fundamental issue, is demonstrating clearly that what we do adds value, and the clients fail to invest in advertising and marketing at their peril. That if you're in the business of building, so going back to John Brown's definition of what, he was talking about CSR, and he said, if you're in the business of building long-term brands, you won't ignore all the stakeholders and communities you operate in. Well, I would say if you're in the business of building long-term brands, you won't reduce, diminish, cut to oblivion your investment in advertising and marketing, because that's the lifeblood. And once you see volume growth start to tail off, and there are many examples of where some clients are maybe getting a little bit of revenue growth because of pricing, a little bit, particularly in Latin America, for example. But when you see those volumes tail off, that's the danger signal. And that's when you have to reinvest. And maybe getting the balance between advertising and promotion is important. Instead of paying large amounts of money for slotting allowances and the like, what you should be doing is investing in the brand, not just in what we do, but adjunct or the origins of what we do in innovation. I mean, in FMCG, for example, which is under significant pressure for all sorts of reasons, of the free technological disruption, activist investors and ZBB, what you have to do is to innovate. Or you innovate or you die, and I think you innovate and you advertise or you die.
Innovate, advertise or die.
Yes.
That's a great way to leave it. Martin Sorrell, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
A few months ago, we held a thought leadership summit in New York with some of the leading innovative brands of the world, together with chief marketing officers and marketing leaders. Let's hear some of the themes from that summit.
No consumer that we're trying to reach has to settle for average anymore. They can have the best price, the best quality product, the best customer service. So in order for us to engage them and to make them pay attention, we all have to deliver amazing.
Big data, big data, big data. As a marketer, every time I pick up the phone, I get sold something around data, which is important, but I have no idea what to do with that data. So that becomes a critical component from a serviceability standpoint, how we think about things. No one needs another dashboard. Only people need usable insights and usable data.
Finding the right problem is often more important than coming up with a great solution. And
so I think there is a tension between us wanting privacy, not to be talked to and spooked, and yet recognizing that the more personal and more relevant, the more likely we are to close a sale.
The common assumption is that young people hate advertising. 32% of them have an ad blocker installed on their mobile device. Well, they actually love advertising. They just smell bullshit from a mile away. And they want it to be authentic, they want it to be meaningful, and they want it to be purposeful.
There's this idea that intimacy and personalization is all about being stalked and being sold and being pushed things. But at the end of the day, there are consumers who actually want something. And there's many, many flavors of it.
This idea of loyalty, this idea of intimacy, this idea of service, that human connection isn't just content. It's how you relate them to the brand so that they want more. Imagine a world where we have more of the greatest luxury in the world, which is time, because of things like artificial intelligence, autonomous cars, et cetera, and what you would do at that time.
For your innovation teams, it's really understanding where we are, where your current audience is, and what is actually going to satiate them and delight them, and not just inundate them with kind of the bells and whistles.
Where we are very close to being is being able to take on a one-to-one level when people inbound, take all the information that we have about them, predict what's going to be the most effective creative breakdown for them, the right promotion, the right tagline, the right image, serve it to them, learn dynamically on the fly, and re-update the engine, done at a scale of 1 million.
I think the future of advertising and ads is content that matters to people in environments that hopefully take away friction and exceed expectation. I think unlearning is probably the biggest next step. To me, you can't go wrong when you're sort of aligning yourself around meeting or exceeding the consumer's expectations, and there's business outcomes associated.
You're listening to a live web broadcast from the studios here in London for the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017. My name is David Roth from WPP, and if you want to ask a question, please just send an email to this address or send me a tweet. Well, we've spoken a lot about the BrandZ Top 100. Now it's time to reveal the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2017. Wow, what an amazing top 100. And here to discuss the top 100 with me is Doreen Wang, who is the global head of BrandZ for Kantar Millward Brown and my partner in crime on the BrandZ project.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. What do you make of the top 100 for this year, Doreen?
2017 has been a good year for brands, despite all these geopolitical uncertainties. We are seeing that the top 100, the total value has increased by 8%. Compared to last year, the growth was 3%. There is this additional healthy gain. And the top 100, the total value has reached to $3.6 trillion US dollars. That is a big number. That's actually a very big number. It's
Give us some scale of how big that number is.
Yeah, it's even larger than the country GDP of Germany.
That's
so
big.
the 100 brands value is larger than the fourth largest economy in the world. Isn't that very impressive?
Now, the top brands, we've just seen the video, let's take it from the top in a sense. What do you make of the top 4?
Yeah, you've already know who are the most valuable brands. So congratulations to Google, and who has gained another 7% very healthy brand value over the past year and become the most valuable global brand, followed by Apple with a modest 3% value increase. Our number 3 is Microsoft with an 18% value increase, and mainly contributed by its very healthy, successful business in the cloud services. And Microsoft is also the top B2B brand. And this year is absolutely worth mentioning Amazon, who has gained significantly, which is a 41% value gain from last year.
I mean, that's doubly impressive because of the gains it made the previous year and the previous year to that. So on a compound basis, that's an extraordinary growth over a short period of time, percentage-wise, let alone, in a sense, in hard numbers.
That's very true, and that's also because Amazon is expediting its journey from just a pure e-commerce brand and right now to an ecosystem brand. And whenever consumers are going, Amazon is always there. Video, music, Alexa, you can imagine Amazon is there.
Now, if you have a look at when we first started the rankings to 2017, 12-year period, what observations can we make now, looking backwards and forwards?
One key observation is the strong brands are getting stronger. When we look at the top 10 today, the total value is equal to the entire 100's brand value in 2006. Just compared to last year, 3 more brands have entered this $100 billion threshold. So we now have 9 brands. And out of the top 10, 9 of the brands are from the United States, 1 from China, that is Tencent.
Now, when we started, the top 10 looks significantly different to the top 10 today, almost a different world.
Yes. Let's travel back to 2006.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is the time probably we would drive in Toyota and went to Citibank and get some cash and shop in Walmart and put Coca-Cola and Marlboro in the basket. And those are still very, very strong brands. And however, they are not in the top 10 anymore, mainly because consumers' footprint, consumers' purchase journey have changed significantly. And they may find something interesting on Google and buy with their iPhone and get Alexa delivered to their front door. And because of this consumer's journey change, and these ecosystem brands is playing more and more important roles.
Now, technology brands grew 16%. How does that compare to non-tech brands in a sense?
Non-tech brand is 4%, so technology brands has this very big advantage.
Okay, let's take a look at the newcomers. Those of you who are very smart, sharp-eyed, might I add, would have noticed who the newcomers were looking at the video, but let's take a snapshot of who they are.
Yes, we really welcome the 2017 newcomers. They are Xfinity, YouTube, HPE, Salesforce, Netflix, Snapchat, and Sprint. And all the 7 brands have something in common. They are from the United States. They are the new generation of Silicon Valley brands, and they think global from day one, and they are also significantly younger than the average age.
Well, it certainly looks like the early Silicon Valley bets are now paying off in terms of very big and highly valued brands. Doreen, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. We'll come and discuss a few things with you a little bit later on. Now, over the course of the year, we speak to a number of global marketing directors in order to understand what's on their mind and to discuss the issues of brand building and the changes in marketing. Let's take a look at what some of those CMOs have to say.
And today, if you look at most of the customer, they don't do one channel. They do multiple channels, okay? Sometimes they do online, sometimes they do offline. Some category they do online, some category they do offline. And those group of people, consumers, they are looking for quality product, quality service. This also gave the e-commerce, particularly like the JD.com, because we're committed to give consumer the superior shopping experience, a great opportunity to grow. So there is quite a lot of things we need to transform, and we are exactly in the right time to think about that and to set the direction. And then we do this transformation step by step. One thing I don't think that will change is our customer-centric philosophy. That one remains same. Because we believe no matter how external change, so we can leverage those technology, but the fundamental, understand the customer needs, delight them, or even exceed their expectation. It's our fundamentals of the business.
10 years back versus today, the consumer is very, very different in terms of expectation of what products are going to do to them, are much, much better informed, questioning a lot more, and making far more informed choices. So they read the labels, they are very conscious about the health aspects of products they are taking. So what is it going to do to them? So they are clearly, asking a lot more questions than they ever did. Consumers have a point of view. Consumers are sharing a lot of things. They are very expressive today. So getting them early on in the stage of development, rather than, you have the product ready and show, okay, do you like it and what do you say? But it's better to have consumers participate in our development process at an early stage, and co-creating the product with them makes a big difference in getting the innovations right. But the fact is, consumers thirst for new products, new capability, new evolving needs is so high that you need to speed up your innovation, and you have to constantly look at what is that consumer's going to look next.
Today, we have to go back in different way to the days when retail was a one-on-one understanding of your customer base, kind of that local shop fitter that you knew very well on their first name basis. Yeah. It's data driven, but it is also basically driven by a forensic and detailed research and conversation with your customer. So it is not about the amount of data you're collecting, it's picking the right signal, and most importantly, doing something about it. 20 years ago, we probably had 3 or 4 levers to pull. Today you're basically in the cockpit of Concorde traveling at Mach 2 because that's the speed of it, and you have an instrumentation and a dashboard which is much more complex. And it is how we are all as retailers and brand deciding what lever to activate. So I don't think retailing is for the risk averse. I think you need to really fundamentally understand the dynamics that are playing, but it's a fascinating time to be in retail. There is a great demand for uniqueness, specialness.
Well, I'm now joined by Peter Walsh, who is the Global Strategy Director for Kantar Millward Brown, has been working with and on BrandZ absolutely since its inception. Peter, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've taken a look at the brands, we made a few observations. I'd like to discuss with you some of the key themes that cut across all of the categories, indeed maybe either also all of the brands? What do you think?
Well, the first thing that's absolutely dramatic from our lovely BrandZ data is that if a brand is meaningfully different in the mind of the relevant consumers, then it has a terrific advantage. Meaningful meaning meeting people's needs in a loving way. And if you combine that with different, then very, very powerful. And the graphic shows the same 86 brands that we valued back in 2006 and what their scores were on meaningfully different, and how their values have changed over that period. And the top third, as you can see, scored their value raised by 4 times the bottom third and 3 times the middle third.
And the so what is the implication?
The implication is if you can connect with consumers by getting the perception that your brand is meaningful in a different way, then you have a terrific advantage in being the one that's chosen and therefore generating sales.
And over time, Peter, meaningfully different, looking at that progress over the 12-year period.
Yeah, the top 100, the average meaningful difference score started off very high at 110. The average brand would be 100. So it was very high. But the bar has got raised even higher, so that now it's 119, I think the actual number is. So it's showing that brands are working harder and harder, and it's more and more difficult to get into that space. And of course, what does it coincide with? It coincides with the top 100 raising in value quite dramatically.
Now, if we take a look at the shape of the profile of the brands in the top 100 12 years ago versus today, that profile is almost from a different planet.
Yes, it's completely different, because the brands that are more meaningfully different to us nowadays tend to be the tech-focused, tech-enabled brands.
Including our fearsome 5.
The fearsome 5, of course, have this in spades. They're incredibly meaningfully different, and they've grown massively over that period.
Now, we see technology brands increasing, but it's not, in a sense, just the technology brands. In fact, across all the categories, technology is playing a disproportionate part now, isn't it?
I think it's almost the other way around. If you're not utilizing the benefits of technology to make your brand better and easier to come across and to be used by consumers, then you're really missing out. And that shows right through the numbers.
Now, let's look at some of the categories. We've got apparel on the screen here. What's the apparel story?
Well, the apparel story is very interesting. When you dive down into this lovely BrandZ data, we saw that brands which we can define as sort of sportswear brands, Adidas, Nike, Lululemon, Under Armour, for example, they are more meaningfully different than their competitors and are worth more as a proportion of the top 10 than they were 10 years ago. And when you look at how they perform in terms of the aspects that drive meaningfully difference, like brand purpose, which is the perception of making my life better, they have that in greater terms than the other more relatively ordinary brands.
Now, let's take a look at the car market, Peter. Dear to my heart, I've worked in the car market for years. What's the storyline here?
Well, here we see a very interesting phenomenon, which is you would have thought that, cars you're going to buy on price and cheapness will happen, but actually we see the opposite. The brands that are making the biggest proportion of the value of the top 10 are the luxury brands, the ones that are perceived to be more differentiated in particular. So you see that Tesla, for example, big car brand rising up the rankings in cars, is meaningfully different because it's massively full of brand purpose, making lives better. Land Rover is about innovation. BMW is about communications. So that's what the story is there.
Take a look at personal care, because we see a sort of a replication of this luxury story in the personal care market as well.
Yes, it is a trend that's going across several categories. And again, the brands that are particularly differentiated, and in this case, quite long-standing brands, L'Oreal, for example, is incredibly strong in terms of the communications which emphasize its meaningful difference in terms of its innovation and its purpose in life.
Now, you would have thought luxury is luxury, but we see within the luxury sector a super luxury sector.
Yeah, I think, if you're buying Hermes or Rolex, some of those really super luxury brands, you're doing so, Chanel is another good example, you're doing so because it really stands for something that makes you feel good and makes it well worthwhile to purchase those. And that's why they take greater value share in terms of that. So part of this shift towards added value.
Well, there's a lot more analysis of this data in the report, which you can download immediately after this broadcast. Peter Walsh from Kantar Millward Brown, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, you've seen how we've used the BrandZ data for valuations, but the BrandZ data is used for all sorts of things, and there are a couple of new innovations using the BrandZ data set which I'm not certain you're familiar with, so we'll spend just a few minutes talking about them so you can try them out for yourselves. The first is SocialZ, which looks at how a brand performs in the social area. It's a live dashboard which has feeds from all of the major social networks. The second is InnovationZ. We know from the BrandZ data how important brands' perception of innovation is in terms of growing their brand value. And InnovationZ helps understand how the consumer views the brand in terms of innovation, and also will give you a whole series of innovations from around the world that are relevant for your category. And lastly, WebZ, which will be launched in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And WebZ will give you a very clear view about how your brand is doing on the web. All you need to do to get access to that data is just go to Inside WPP and go onto the BrandZ sites. Just use your Inside WPP passwords and you get access to all of the BrandZ data. Now, we've seen a couple of slides which look at the new entrants into the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands. We've spoken about some of the top risers. Let's take a look at the top risers and the new entrants to the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2017. Well, I'm now joined by Martin Guerrera, who is the Research Director for Kantar Millward Brown on the BrandZ project. Martin, thanks very much indeed for joining us. What do you make of the top 10 risers this year?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. So obviously the one that sticks out is Adidas as our fastest percentage riser, growing a massive 58% year on year. And I think Adidas is an interesting brand. It's the perfect storm of sports, fashion and technology. And they've really embraced technology. And I think they're a good example of a more traditional brand who've managed to do that and grow as a result. And by using recycled plastics in some of their product lines, by doing things like introducing 3D printing of some of their sneakers and trainers in store to enhance consumer experience. That's really how they've done it. And I think if we look at their progression in terms of their meaningful difference, we can see that over the course of the last 12 years, looking back to 2006 to where they are now, a lot of those strategies have resulted in that improved performance, and ultimately that's why their value has increased by such a dramatic amount.
What about Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon's a really interesting example. So they are our fastest riser in terms of dollar growth. So they've grown by a massive $40 billion this year, and their CEO, Jeff Bezos, is about to be named the world's richest man, if we believe the press. Yes, quite an achievement.
Not saying Bill Gates would like that too much.
No, maybe not. I think the way they've achieved that is his ethos is very much around seeing every day as day one. So they have a real commitment to innovation. So through innovative ideas like Amazon Go, Amazon Prime membership has doubled this year. Their web services business is going from strength to strength. They've obviously had Alexa, Echo. They always seem to be at the forefront of the next big idea, and I think by doing that, that's how they're driving themselves forward.
And what about Netflix? Interesting one on this list.
Yeah, Netflix is interesting because when Netflix first launched, they almost defined the category of on-demand TV and were very much defined as a brand by that to begin with. But as competitors have come onto the scene, they've made a tactical decision to really invest a lot of budget in their own programming and content. So programs like The Crown, House of Cards have been massive international successes for them, and I think that's why they've been so successful. They've also focusing on building their business outside of the States, so now a massive 40% of their revenue comes from overseas accounts. So it just shows that they're no longer looking inwardly, they're starting to look outward, and by investing in programming, that's how they're growing their profile globally and resulting in this massive growth.
Well, Martin, for the moment, thank you very much. We'll be back to talk to you more a little bit later on. Now, Sir Martin Sorrell talked about the geopolitical influences, and that's a subject that I picked up with Tamara Ingram, the global CEO of J. Walter Thompson, and its relationships with brands over a video conference a few days ago. Well, I'm now joined by Tamara Ingram, who's the global CEO of J. Walter Thompson. Tam, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You join us at an interesting time. Yesterday, President Trump withdrew the US from the Paris climate agreement. We've seen various different brand owners, entrepreneurs, make a stand already on that. Tim Cook for Apple has already spoken out about it. Elon Musk from Tesla has withdrawn from certain committees that he was sitting on for the Trump administration. Is it now impossible for brands to escape the political climate?
I think brands need to be authentic to their purpose and to their benefit, and within the context, stay true to that. I do think there is a context, however, and I think people have an expectation with what is difficult in the world and what feels like some tough messages, whether it's Syria or whether it's politics, that brands are a ray of hope. Not unrealistic hope, but a ray of hope. So have a sense of purpose in life and are true and connected to their benefits.
Does this not place brands in a very difficult position, though?
It depends how brands behave. If brands take on a political stance, I think it does place them in a difficult position. But if brands are true to what they naturally offer, true to why they are around, true to their role, then I think brands can play a very important part of the world by, in a sense, bringing people together and giving people a sense of benefits by what they offer.
And what?
Can I give you an example?
Sure, please, yeah.
So there's a brand that Joe Walter Thompson look after called Elevate, which is in China, and it's to help women who are pregnant. And in today's world, a brand needs to, as I say, have a purpose, and a purpose that not only delivers a benefit, which is healthy nutrition for people who are pregnant, but also a sense of utility. So an insight in China is that men are not allowed to go to a women's first scan. So what Elevate did is created a utility which meant that after a woman had her first scan, she was given a product that she could place on her husband's heart so he could feel the baby's first heartbeat. Lovely. So what did that do? It was wonderful. It created a conversation in China, big conversation to want people to talk about why can't they be there and what it's like to participate. It elevated Elevate, the brand, and its role it had in women's pregnancy, and it gave a fantastic benefit and emotionally brought husband and wife together in a very moving time. So I think brands can play a very important role in a political environment, but they have to do it from their truth. Otherwise, there are authentic issues, and also I think it creates disbelief and cynicism.
And what role is there for us as marketeers and communicators to work with the clients in order to understand the parameters of what would be good for them in that context and what would be straying into difficult territory?
I think we have a hugely important role to understand the brand and the consumer need, and not to go away for authenticity. So if we think of a number of clouds, there have been a lot of stories about that recently, when brands try to co-opt politics or go against what is naturally theirs. It causes a great deal of cynicism and actually rejection of the brand. So our role is always to be true to that brand and to make sure that purpose isn't so disconnected from actually what the brand's benefit offers, that again it creates a rise of cynicism. I think we're in a fantastic place to help when it's in a politically slightly dark environment, to help people feel optimistic and to deliver benefits.
One of the things that we're seeing more of across the world is countries looking inward as opposed to looking outward. One of the things that obviously brands do around the world is create large amounts of employment. Do you think that brands have underplayed their role in society in that respect?
I don't think people are interested in brands and how they've created employment. I do think they're interested in corporate brands, if I can separate the two, and how they've created employment. And I think we have absolutely underplayed that. I'm very proud of working with 4WPP and the amount of people we employ. I'm very proud of having a number of clients who employ over 100,000 people. These are jobs, mortgages, livelihoods, health, education, well-being, reading, getting people out of poverty. And I think we forget sometimes that that plays an enormous role in society. So I think when we look after corporate brands as opposed to product brands, I think it's hugely important to stress that.
We've just seen the Co-op in the UK launch a campaign where they talk about using only British beef, not just about the quality aspects of that, but also about how that creates employment and how that helps individual local towns and societies thrive. Do you think more and more brands and marketeers will be using local communities as the forefront of some of their marketing campaigns going forward?
It is very clear to me that intense localization is where the world is going. So we've got a paradox of, yes, very global, but true intensely local, and I think brands will pick up on that. In fact, indeed, I think you could get different benefits from products depend on the location. I think the more AI they'll have, the more we're able to get people in reality in real time, and then the more the local will become very important. So yes, I think that will happen, but I suspect the more that happens, there'll be a counter trend of connecting with global communities. But absolutely, I think localization is a key trend.
And finally, Tamara, it's just a few weeks' time until Cannes starts, I suppose the Oscars for the advertising industry. What do you think the key themes this year are going to be in Cannes?
I think the key themes will be at two extremes. At one extreme, it'll be about AI, it'll be about technology, it'll be about utilization. And on the other hand, I think there will be an obscurity in a sense, because we'll see lots of awards and these very ingenious solutions. And then on the other hand, a sense of big storytelling really matter. And I think there'll be a discussion about how important is the big idea and big storytelling and gaining people's emotion versus actually technology and virtual reality and AI. And my view is there isn't an either or, but I think there'll be a fair bit of discussion around
Well, Tamara Ingram, the Global Chief Executive of J. Walter Thompson, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks very much, David. Great to be included.
You're watching the live webcast for the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands 2017 here in our studio in London. And Doreen has joined us again. Thanks very much indeed, Doreen. Let's now take a look at the Top 100 value by the various different world regions. What's the story here?
US brands continues to dominate our top 100. 71% of the total value is contributed by brands from America, and which is almost a 200% growth from last year. Another massive grower is China. So from 12 years ago, basically only one child in the top 100, now to 13 brands, a massive 10 times value growth.
Well, we'll be discussing China in more detail a little bit later on. Let's just take a look at the top 10 in each of those major global regions.
When we zoom into the top 10 for each country and the region, like US top 10 in total is worth 1.4 trillion US dollars, even higher than the country GDP of Canada. And the China top 10 is 367 billion US dollars, and with one brand, Tencent has surpassed the $100 billion threshold.
And if we look into the regions in more detail, country specific, US.
Yes, US. In addition to the tax fearsome five, we also have AT&T, Visa, IBM, McDonald's, and Verizon have entered the US top 10, and most of these brands have achieved a healthy brand value growth.
And Latin America looks a lot of fun.
Yeah, Latin America
like
is all very exciting. Yes, 4 beers, Skol, Corona, Brahma, and Aguila. And all the top 10, global top 10 beers, 4 are from LATAM, and the value has achieved 23% growth since last year.
And if we have a look at Asia, excluding China.
Yeah, Asia, we are seeing lots of brands from Japan and Korea, like Toyota, Samsung, NTT is a leading Japanese telecom providers. We also see HDFC, our most valuable Indian brand, with a very high brand purpose and develop itself into a very strong innovative platform and for fintech startup companies.
Now, what about Europe?
Yeah, Europe is led by SAP, a leading technology company, and successfully transitioned itself from a legacy software company and to now a platform brand and integrating a lot of services mainly on a cloud business. And we also see great performers like Hermes, which has increased its value by 18% over the last year. While the other luxury brands are cutting back, Hermes is the brand really leaning in and keep investing on its core product and keep investing in communication and drive up the brand value.
And what about here in the UK?
Yeah, UK is led by Vodafone, HSBC, and Shell is number 3. Shell has achieved a 23% value growth since last year, and Shell is very collaborative in terms of partnership with Toyota and for support hydrogen cars, and Shell is also doing very well in the fast-growing markets, especially India and China.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about China, because it's impossible to ignore, even if you wanted to. You said at the beginning of this section that there was only one Chinese brand in the top 100 when we started, and the growth has been phenomenal. Let's take a look at that growth.
Yes, from one child, single child, to 13 child now, 13 children now. And also a lot of these Chinese companies are very ambitious in terms of going global. So a lot of them have already set up their operations in the Silicon Valleys, and they are very keen to recruit like global talents.
Now, it's not just the number of brands, it's the shape of those brands, the profile of those brands that's also changed significantly.
Yes, when we talk about Chinese brands, they are not all the same. And we need to divide it into two groups. One is the state-owned enterprises, which has been declining their value, and only in the past year is a 5% decline. But the other group is the private entrepreneurial brands, and they have increased their values even better, and which is a 15% gain from last year. And that's also reflected the economy structure change from a structured economy and right now to a consumer-driven to a shared economy.
Now, let's take a look at the top 10 Chinese brands. What stands out?
Yes, we have talked about the famous Tencent and Alibaba. It's absolutely worth highlighting Huawei. Probably a lot of us already got a Huawei cell phone.
Well, it's difficult to enter an airport or leave an airport anywhere in the world now without seeing some sort of Huawei communication.
Yes, in Saudi Arabia, even like Salvador, and you won't be able to avoid Huawei. And it is one of the most globalizing Chinese brands, already established its footprint in over 100 country markets.
Well, Doreen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, when we started doing individual country brand valuations, we started with China. And for the past 7 years, we've been valuing the top 100 most valuable Chinese brands. And a few weeks ago, we launched the 2017 BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Chinese Brands at a seminar in Beijing for over 1,000 clients, marketeers, and opinion formers around China. As part of that event, we held a CEO panel. CEOs from global companies around the world as well as China. And let's take a look at what those CEOs had to say.
It's a G2 world. If we look at our own industries and the incremental GDP growth for 2017, it's dominated by two countries, the US and China. And I think that will continue to be the case for a significant period of time. That gives the Chinese, in my view, a massive opportunity.
One of the biggest, I'll speak about China, one of the biggest strengths of China's attitude, the dedication, the believing in a better tomorrow, the going for it, the feeling, the self-responsibility to your own life. It's contagious. I must say, it's motivating to come over here and feel that.
When we look at the growth rate over the last 15 years of the dairy industry, it has passed already a stage where you see like 20% growth each year. But however, if you look at the way the consumer changing, there are opportunities that the fresh dairy product, healthy product are getting a much higher growth, and we still can see a 15 to 20% growth. So the question to us is that, how are we able to change ourselves to meet the new, let's say, the new normal?
You have small competitors coming up. In one day's time, they are seen and heard and connecting with the world. The world is going to see reverse innovation out of China, new trends. The consumer in China is faster moving than any consumer in the world. So all these new dimensions are challenging for a company like ours, yet at the same time are huge opportunities.
But our learning has been, if we do not want disruptions to take over us, then we should disrupt ourselves first. Some of the worrisome industries, such as healthcare, education for that matter, finance, they're getting a new leaves of life because such entrepreneurial spirits of the founders or the leaders of the organizations are embracing technology.
We have seen many examples, very successful Chinese company, 10 years history, 15 years history, easily collapse, or, And so that's why I think today, when you look at brand, is really the single biggest asset.
China and the Chinese consumer has moved dramatically in the last 10, 15, 20 years in asking exactly and expecting exactly the same things that what we would consider as the more sophisticated, evolved consumers elsewhere.
I would say a increasing focus on quality over anything else. And that's not just quality in the way of the attributes of the product that you present and improve functionality, but it's also in the quality of how the company operates. It's a force for good for society, and I think is a way we can differentiate ourselves.
Well, I'm now here with Lindsay Patterson, who is the global CEO of Maxis. Lindsay, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We've seen the results of the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands. We've seen a number of brands increase their value over a consistent number of years. You believe that for brands to continue to grow their value, their relationship with the consumer, that brands really now need to take a stand. Why is that?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting trends around brand purpose. And I think last year was a tumultuous year. And I think the changes in the political systems, both in the US and in Europe, have meant that people are looking for more. They're searching behind walls. And they're looking for not only their leaders to take stands, but they're looking for their brands to try and do something, almost to fill the void of leadership that we now see in the world.
Is that not a very dangerous thing for a brand to do? I mean, we've seen brands take a stand on, on sustainability, which is, in a sense, good for everybody. And there's some big global leaders, businesses who've taken a stand on that.
I think it can be incredibly risky, and we're here in early May, and we just saw the disaster with Pepsi recently, where they tried to take a stand and did it in a very ill-judged way, because you can't be trite about a brand purpose. And I think in the past what companies have done is kind of got away with greenwashing. They've stated about a brand purpose, but meanwhile they've been relentlessly about making money. And I think today, when we look to consumers, and particularly millennials, that terribly overused word, but when we look at Gen Y, the younger end of millennials, actually doing good in the world and feeling like brands have a real purpose. And also, of course, because of the digital world, being able to look behind brands means you've got to try much harder than that. Yeah, I mean, I think consumers want to have a voice, and I think they know they're very powerful. So the days of talking or telling people what to think or what to go and choose are long gone. I think brands that are doing it better, and again, very recent example that you could compare to Pepsi with Heineken, who put consumers with opposing views into, I don't know if you've seen it.
I have, yes.
Into a room a bit like this, but with very widely divergent views, and then asked them to do some tasks together to have a conversation, and then eventually revealed their differences, and then said, look, do you want to walk out, or do you want to have a chat over a beer? So actually there was a purpose to that, and actually it linked back to the product as well, and I think that was incredibly smart, and it really really resonated.
Now, what would you advise clients who are and brands who are thinking about, what should their sort of purpose be, or what should their stand be? How do they go about creating and developing that in a way that it's fit with the brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's a terribly overused word, but it has to be authentic to the brand. You can't just do a poll and decide what kind of cause you're going to go after. I think it has to have a meaning to a brand. So when brands are incredibly powerful is when passion meets purpose. So that's what brands should really look for. And that's when you're successful, because you're doing it because you're passionate about it and there's a real drive. The media world today allows us to be much more precise in targeting our audience, because we have so much data at our fingertips. We can understand much more in a much more nuanced way versus, old-fashioned survey data, understanding how people truly think and believe. So I do think it changes it changes where we put that content, and crucially it would be in environments where there's always a return path where people can have a conversation, because that's what the brand is trying to do. But I think, my passion and my purpose has been female equality. So we created a program last year called Walk the Talk. We've taken 280 of our most senior women around the world on a program to understand any of our own limiting beliefs, any kind of internal barriers we're putting up to success. Because when we look across our industry, whether it's media or advertising or any part of comms, we just don't have enough women in senior positions. And then broaden it out into the business world, and it's even worse. So that's my passion and has been our purpose. And I think it was really important that the CEO has to stand behind it. And to WPP's credit, Martin has now talked about gender equality being the most important cause that WPP, and we've signed up to the UN Common Ground Agenda for gender equality and to try and achieve gender equality by 2030.
And how important has it been for you to bring the organisation with you on that? Because it's pretty easy, I suppose, for the CEO, global CEO like you to say that's how it's going to be. But presumably,
I'd love to think I had that. It was that easy, and I had that much control.
I'm sure you have that much control.
Yeah, it's influence, not control, isn't it? But you start with a business case. A better, diverse leadership creates better business decisions. People with diverse leaders on boards make better financial returns. So you can go back to the facts. And actually, really the crucial one in advertising on gender equality, you look at our consumers. We have to be reflective of the consumers that we are talking to. So that's both in the communications that we're doing. So how about men do the laundry sometimes, and women don't make all the decisions on makeup. They sometimes make car decisions, and they even take out bank accounts. I'm being trite, but women actually make the majority of consumer decisions. So if we are not talking to them,
my household, that's for sure.
Yeah, if we're not talking to them in an empathetic way, then that doesn't make any sense for the business in which we're all involved. So I think it's a no-brainer.
Fantastic. Well, Lindsay, thank you very much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Well, welcome back, Martin.
Thanks.
Each year when we look at what research to do, what countries, what categories, we like to do one thing, one country that's new. Last year it was Myanmar for the first time, and this year it has been Cuba.
Yes.
And Martin project managed Cuba together with Igor, and we sort of looked for the very, very first time, the very first study ever done in Cuba looking at brands. What did we discover, Martin?
Yeah, I think we discovered a lot in over the course of the project. So I think some misperceptions that we had going in, one of them was that Cuban consumers were just not particularly brand savvy. And I think that was a myth that was quickly dispelled when we actually started doing the work. So consumers were certainly telling us that they were making decisions on what to buy based on brand rather than just on price. And they were much more brand savvy than we expected. And there were some reasons for that. So I think one was they actually receive what they call the offline internet, El Paquete Semanal, the weekly package, which is distributed offline with USB sticks on mobile phones.
And that's because it's virtually impossible to get the internet.
Well, exactly,
live.
yeah, as we found out during that week. But by that medium, Cuban consumers are watching movies, they're watching TV shows, they're consuming advertising, so they know more about brands than you might expect. And also the expat community, most of whom are still very close, just over the water in Miami, are sending back quite high volumes of branded goods to family and friends. So actually, Cuban consumers knew more about brands than perhaps we would have expected.
Now, the insight from our study really did pinpoint the fact that from a brand perspective, there is still tremendous first mover advantage to be gained by brands in Cuba.
Yeah, absolutely. So awareness is one thing, but actually knowing something about what the brand stands for and the proposition is something else. So we have a way of looking at brands on BrandZ and classifying them with different typologies. One of those typologies is what we call a clean slate brand, which basically means the consumer knows enough about the brand to be aware of it, but can't really verbalise much about the proposition. And as this information shows, the prevalence of clean slate brands in Cuba was almost 3 times what we'd expect versus the global database. So it did show there was a first mover advantage, as you say.
Now, we have this theme in the report, and I'll show you how you can download the Cuba analysis a little bit later on, of social networking in a physical world. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, and I think what we thought going into Cuba and starting the research was that actually the rules for engagement with consumers were different because advertising is illegal. Actually, it's not illegal, it's just highly vetted by the government to be on message. And actually, it is possible to connect with consumers, but via other means. So PR is a big tool for brands for use in Cuba. And Google did a very successful PR event sponsoring an art exhibition in Havana in 2016. So there are ways to connect with the consumer, and PR is certainly the main tool for brands to use right now.
Now, one of our metrics using the BrandZ data, and all of you get access to this analysis, is character Z. What do the character Z of the brands in Cuba show up?
Yeah, so character Z is all about brand personality, and we have 10 different archetypes that we classify each brand in the database as. A rebel brand, not surprisingly, is deemed to be particularly rebellious versus competitors in the category. And for the categories we covered, so beer, spirits, coffee, and tobacco, even when we controlled for the same categories in the global database, we saw that brands that were deemed to be rebel brands occurred at twice the rate that we would expect.
Fidel would be proud.
Yes,
pleased.
I'm sure he would. I'm sure he would. And not only were they more rebel brands than we might expect, they were much clearly defined as being rebellious than a typical rebel brand in the global database. So an interesting and perhaps quite a fun finding as well.
Now, what was Cuba's most powerful brands?
So the most powerful brand by a long way was Havana Club, so the world famous Cuban rum. Cristal beer is another Cuban brand which is beginning to get a foothold on the international stage. And I think given the level of entrepreneurship and sheer volume of ideas that we saw when we were talking to Cuban consumers and some of the entrepreneurs we got talking to in Cuba, I certainly don't think that those two will be the last brands from Cuba to have that presence on the world stage. But as we said, there's potential for Cuban brands to go international, but there's certainly potential for international brands to start to break into and have a presence in Cuba as times are changing politically and economically.
Well, Martin, thank you very much indeed. And this is the BrandZ Thought Leadership Spotlight on Cuba report. You can download it, and I'll give you the details at the end of this web seminar where you can get it from. It's absolutely packed full of insight about Cuba, history of Cuba, analysis of the brands, the BrandZ data, and some absolutely sensational photography by our photographer, Cecile. Well, many of you may not have heard of Refinery 29, but they are redefining how to communicate with at least 50% of the population. Well, Kate, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Perhaps we could start off because many people watching today probably wouldn't have heard of Refinery 29, or if they have, don't really know it in great depth. So perhaps you can give us a little overview of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you so much. It's a real honour to be part of this programme. Refinery 29 is a media company for women. We talk to an audience of over 500 million women a month across all of our channels globally. We connect with women by telling stories that matter most to them. everything from style, fashion and beauty content, all the way through to global news, politics, wellness, health, and really all of the subjects that interest them in between around their lifestyle, finance, fitness, interior decor. So we're really building a really rich ecosystem for young women of content everywhere from Snapchat, where we have a Discover channel, we're one of the original partners, all the way through to our owned and operated site, an email newsletter, and of course Facebook and other social channels.
Now we're hearing a lot in the press and indeed even in the report for the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for this year about millennial and the impact that millennials are having for brands, brand owners and marketing. At least 50% of millennials are women. Give us a feel for what are the issues that are impacting millennial women at the moment.
I think it's a really interesting term, the term millennial. I think at Refinery we see it more as a mindset. We see it as a set of characteristics that bind together a generation, but quite a broad generation. I think we see global connectedness as a real attribute of this audience. They're participating in an always-on global content culture. Beyonce announces her pregnancy with one Instagram post, and it's seen by millions in every country in the world. Films are released, albums are released, fashion lines are observed. So really they're participating in global culture and a global news cycle. At the same time, they're more globally conscious than ever. They're participating in wider narratives about politics, about sustainability. So really, it's a global generation. The second is that it's a generation that are really driven by purpose. We've seen this again and again in our studies with our audience, that this is a generation that are demanding more of the world in which they live. 85% of our audience say that they would switch to a brand that aligned better with their values. So this is a purpose-driven generation that are hoping to participate positively in the world in which they live and demanding the same from both the influencers but also from the brands that they're consuming and interacting with. I think,
but it's not a generation that doesn't like marketing, is it?
Absolutely
or
not.
being marketed to, or being communicated with.
Absolutely not, and I think that that's one of the kind of common misconceptions about this audience. They actually truly reward brands that positively interact with them. Refinery has excelled at connecting brands to our influential audience of women, particularly young women. We do that by creating compelling content with a specific tone of voice and a narrative in our environment. We don't see that women don't want to consume or interact with content that is funded by or integrates brands. The opposite of that is true. I think a really interesting example this year from the US, we created a program called the 67% Project. It was a program that spoke to how plus-size women were represented in the US. 67% of women in the US are above a size 14, yet they're only represented in 2% of media. We wanted to change that. We created a whole program that aimed to truly represent women. We did that in partnership with Lane Bryant and Aerie, putting them absolutely at the heart of that conversation. I think one of the most interesting things we did was partner with Getty. We created a whole new image archive of plus-size women, and we made that available free so that people could use those images. So there's now no excuse not to have representative images of women. Now, our audience absolutely loved that program. It generated 500 million press impressions and millions of social interactions.
So
that's a great example of where a brand leads a conversation that is relevant and impactful to this audience, and that's what they want to see.
And what are the lessons that brand owners today need to learn in order to be able to communicate successfully to millennial women?
I think the first is thinking back to those attributes. One is that sense of global connectedness. Two is rooting those communications, that content in purpose, and truly understanding. And I think the third is really about celebrating individuality. This is a generation who are very, very conscious of self-expression and wanting to be seen as individuals. They lead very layered and textured lives and have identities online that they've crafted as individuals. Programs that homogenize young women's experience, that don't represent them, won't succeed. And that's why at Refinery things like celebrating diversity, ensuring that you're using models that are representative so people can see themselves in the content. That's absolutely critical to making an impact with this generation.
Now, you just recently completed a very interesting study on millennial women. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, we recently did an interesting study on motherhood and the road to motherhood. Obviously, millennial women as an age bracket, let's call sort of 18 to 35, a lot of them are young mums thinking about having babies. Maybe they've had one and they're thinking about having another one. But I think what's interesting is that this isn't the straightforward path, perhaps, that it used to be. What we're seeing is that women are having a much more varied experience than ever before. It's not so much a career ladder, but a career roller coaster. They may move home with their parents in their 30s to save up to buy that flat. And it's not always the case that you get married and have a baby and that's the course that you take. Many women are choosing not to have children, focus on other things. The study really called upon that variety of experience and tried to unpack it, to try and really truly understand how women felt about the road to motherhood and how they were marketed to by brands and also by traditional media in that context.
I mean, given how many brands there are out there and a number in this year's BrandZ Top 100 whose sort of core target audience is mums in one form or another, what would you say the three most important learnings for those brand owners would be coming out of the study?
I think absolutely the first is that women are really, really keen not to lose their sense of self as they enter motherhood. We saw that 93% still want to be able to pursue their passions and interests after they become a mother. It isn't the only thing that defines them. The second thing is that while social media in particular has been a great source of information and community for mums, offering them interesting perspectives on how to raise their children perhaps, or the road to motherhood, they also more than ever feel the pressure to be perfect, to present a picture of perfection. And we all know that life isn't really like that. And in fact, what we heard a lot was that there are some social media portrayals of motherhood where you only show the bad stuff, but again, you've artfully decorated as your baby has thrown their supper all over you, which certainly isn't the case in my house or many of my friends. So I think understanding that social pressure is important. I think the third thing, and I think this is really, really important, is again in representation. Are there lots of different types of parenthood that are being represented today? How do working mums feel when all of the marketing is about mums who are staying at home? How do mums who are staying at home feel if their particular style of parenting isn't represented as positive or impactful? So the biggest single lesson, I think, is we have to represent women better. We have to talk to them more as individuals. It's very, very hard to do with a mass media approach, but I think absolutely this core of individuality needs to be better represented in order to reach them.
I was very surprised in the study what a role model Claire Underwood was.
Yes.
Why?
Claire Underwood from House of Cards as sort of the number one pick of role models. Look, I think she's uncompromising. She sort of goes for what she wants. She's not afraid to break out of boxes, to challenge stereotypes, to challenge convention. Perhaps not the obvious role model, but I think that those attributes of challenging inherited wisdom, of being seen as uncompromisingly oneself, speak to this trait of individuality that we really need to be focused on.
Well, it'd be interesting to see the new series. What is just starting. So it'd be interesting to see when I get to that binge watching what her character changes and develops in. Where can people get more information about Refinery 29 from?
Absolutely, really simple, refinery29.com. If you want to go to our website, you can check us out on Snapchat, our Discover channel, or on Facebook. You know, if you enjoy it, sign up. We have a daily email that brings all of our style and substance right there. So there's absolutely lots of ways to find us. And yeah, thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this.
Thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you.
As difficult it is to catch up with Martin Sorrell, it's also very difficult to catch up with Eric Salama, CEO and chairman of Kantar. Well, I managed to catch up with Eric via a very dodgy Skype connection on one of his international visits in Scandinavia. And we struggled to find on his iPad somewhere in the room where the mobile signal worked at all. But we managed to find a spot which made him look rather like he was broadcasting from jail, but I can assure you he wasn't. And I asked Eric and began our conversation by asking him why he thought that doing brand valuations was important for us at WPP and for our clients.
I think the main thing is that it takes the discussion about brands into the boardroom and into the CEO conversation. And at a time when all of our clients are questioning how much they ought to invest in brand building, I think it's the single best thing that exists, not just within WPP, but across the industry, to actually make it a conversation about financial value, not just some interesting research metric.
And how important do you think it is now to have that conversation about financial returns in terms of brand investment as opposed to just image returns?
I think it's never been more important. We all have conversations with clients who question the amount of money they ought to spend, how they ought to spend their money. We have zero-based budgeting all over most of our clients. We need to have something like BrandZ to really help us have a conversation which is about the value to those clients and the return on investment of investing in their brands. And it's, as I say, it's the single best tool that exists in the industry, bar none, to have that conversation.
Eric, you sit at Kantar, sort of the epicenter of understanding and really seeing consumer change. What change are you seeing across the Kantar companies in terms of what they're seeing consumers doing differently than they have done in the past? And what implications does that have for brand building in terms of growing value?
I guess everything's become a bit more blurred and a bit more integrated. So obviously within the marketing function, for quite a while now, we've seen clients approach things in a more integrated way and want to think about all forms of media, obviously driven by digital more than anything else these days, but TV, digital, everything. I think what's interesting now, and we've seen it in the way that clients like Unilever have reorganized, and it's always been there in the way that clients like Ford have organized, is that the trade and the shopper side and the channel side of it have also become equally important. And most of our clients spend more on the channel side and on the trade side than they do on the classic brand building consumer side. So I think more and more there's a conversation going on about how do we spend our money effectively, and that includes the channel as well as the consumer. It includes all of their customers as well as the end person.
So all roads seem to lead back to proving efficiency and cost effectiveness of spend and effort.
Yeah, I think that's right, and we're seeing great success with tools like Kantar Retail's Excel, which is a tool in trade promotion optimization. And a few years ago, that would have been something just for a few geeks within a client organization. That's now a board level decision as to who they partner with, and it's a decision which the IT director and the marketing director get together to have a conversation about. So in an era, as I say, in an era of zero-based budgeting, the most important thing that we can do is make the case to our clients of the importance of long-term and very optimized spending.
Looking into the future, Eric, artificial intelligence was pretty much something of science fiction. It's now become very much sort of business fact. What do you see the future of artificial intelligence within Kantar in terms of understanding data? And how do you best mix artificial intelligence, AI, with HI, human intelligence?
Well, just over the weekend, funnily enough, other than watching Arsenal win at Wembley, the two things that I was focusing most on was Gary Kasparov was around doing a series of interviews about the anniversary of him losing to the IBM supercomputer for the first time, and DeepMind that were acquired by Google have just beaten the world champion Go player in China. Now, those are incredible advancements, and I'm not sure that any of us really know where AI is going to go within 10 years. Its ability to do things is astounding and is moving at a very fast pace. I think if you look at the work that we do, when there's more and more data, yes, a supercomputer and an AI computer can help. But actually, it's really important to start with some hypotheses. And I think one of the things that has changed has been, as more and more data becomes available, actually you do need a view of how the world is working, and you do need a view of what's driving people's behavior and some of the motivations to enable some of the tools that you've got, AI or otherwise, to actually do their best. So I do still think that there are lots and lots of areas, and that our business for the foreseeable future will be that combination of much heavier analytics, but also much heavier understanding and storytelling and hypothesis building as to what's actually needed.
Now, this is the first year of your Kantar First strategy. What have been the benefits so far to clients and also WPP colleagues around the world, and how do you see that panning out over the next year?
Well, a number of us, Martin and Tam and Iggy, and a number of us were at a top-to-top meeting with the Danone management in Paris last week, and they spontaneously said, for the first time, we feel like we're getting the best of Kantar, and that when I ask a question about a particular issue, I don't need to worry who I'm asking that question of. I know that I'm going to get people working together seamlessly to actually address that question, which is obviously a fantastic thing to hear, and it delivers huge value to a client like Danone. Now, we're not there yet. I mean, I don't believe that we're delivering that kind of level seamlessly, consistently across all of our clients in every part of the world. So we've still got a way to go, but I think we've now got lots and lots of examples of whether it's an existing client or a new business pitch, and we've just had the same example in terms of winning all of Shell's work around the world. Whether it's an existing client or a new business pitch, we've now got examples of where people coming together add value and deliver impact to a client in the way that no one else can, and that we certainly weren't doing consistently before. So I think the evidence is there. We just need to keep on changing our behaviors. We need to keep on practicing. We need to make it an instinct as opposed to something which is special, but we're getting there. I think from a WPP colleague point of view, I hope that we've become easier to work with, that it's less random as to who you speak to, as to what solution you get. You can speak to anyone, and we should be able to navigate what is still quite a complex company for our other WPP colleagues and make it easier for you.
So what advice do you give to WPP colleagues watching this to tap into the new Kantar?
Find the person that you get on well with the best, find someone who really understands your business, and use them as a kind of human portal into the rest of Kantar.
And finally, Eric, 2 days' time it's the election in the United Kingdom. I know you're a very keen follower of politics. It's been seen a very sort of lacklustre, boring campaign. So finally, Eric, is watching the UK elections more or less exciting than watching Arsenal play?
Well, Arsenal is by far and away more frustrating, and obviously much more important.
Well, Eric Salama, Chairman and Chief Executive of Kantar, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, David.
Well, at BrandZ, we like to practice what we preach. We've been talking about how important innovation is and how important technology is in terms of all of our lives and how we're using it. And now I would like to introduce you to our latest way of you getting access to BrandZ data. Alexa, ask Rosie about brands.
Hello, I'm BrandZ Rosie. Thanks for your interest. Can I ask your name?
David.
Nice to meet you, David. Would you like to talk about this year's Global Brands Top 100 Brands?
Yes.
That's great. Where would you like to start? Maybe look at a particular brand.
Let's talk about Google.
Would you like to know about the Google brand performance in 2017?
Yes.
Google is positioned at number 1 with a value of $245,581. Its brand contribution is 4. Brand value percentage change 2017 versus 2016 is 7% and rank change is 0.
How many newcomers?
This year there are 7 newcomers.
Who are this year's newcomers?
This year's newcomers in the Global Brands Top 100 are Xfinity, YouTube, HPE, Salesforce, Netflix, Snapchat, and Sprint.
Who is this year's top newcomer?
The highest newcomer in the top 100 is Xfinity.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Well, I'm now joined by Mike Smollen, who is the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer for Smollens. Mike, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We just heard Eric Salama talk about actually how much money, in a sense, and thought is moving into the retail environment in one form or another. That's the sweet spot of Smollens, your business.
Yes.
From where you sit at the moment, how do you view the opportunities for brands to build their brand value in the retail environment?
So I think it's correct. I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of tightening around different areas of marketing, and I think one of the sort of last places that you turn to squeeze is your people in store and your people on the ground, your sort of sales force and your execution force and your promoter force. So while we may not see too much growth in the area, we're certainly seeing a resilience towards these cuts. I think if we sort of say where is there place to build value, it depends where we define the store, but if we sort of say that it's the ecosystem around physical retail as a start, there are a couple of areas. The one is kind of consistency, so consistency of messaging to the consumer, consistency of availability and of presence. I think that we often overlook the consistency of a brand's presence to a consumer and that consumer's ability to purchase that brand, and the communication from sort of the brand to that person. Now, while we've seen in modern retail many different ways for the brand to approach the consumer, whether it's social media, whether it's a person in store, whether it's an activation, that interaction is becoming much more important. So the sort of B2C interaction and at the point of purchase, I think, is the best place for a brand to focus in building its value, perhaps its total value, but certainly its in-store value.
Now, you operate in highly developed markets in terms of retail and sort of young markets like Myanmar on the other extreme in terms of retail development. What common themes are there across any of those?
I think, obviously the use of digital, I think e-commerce is of course a common theme, and sort of the move of traditional bricks and mortar retailer categories to e-commerce spaces or e-retailer spaces. So that's certainly a trend, and I think that a lot of markets are almost skipping iterations of physical retail, which we've seen in various technologies, you know, landline, laptop, computer, that sort of thing. I think that the use of digital and the messaging to consumers we're seeing as an easily replicated sort of system, for lack of a better explanation. I think that the way that very developed markets are targeting consumers can be replicated wherever, because almost the route to consumer is becoming homogenous globally. Once we get to a full, and I don't think we'll ever get there, but once we sort of get to a bulky e-retail world, if you think about it, the kind of messaging will be easy to work across different markets. Having said that, I think that we still see a very similar evolution across markets. So, you know, where we're seeing it faster, so places like China, the movement from general trade to modern trade to e-retail is happening much faster. In certain markets, it's happening at the same speed. You know, if you think about sort of some of the Southeast Asian countries, if you think about the African countries, because the distribution capability is very different to what it is in the developed world, we kind of have to go through the hurdles of the normal evolution to get to developed markets. I also think that the investment from brands has been strangled very recently. I mean, we've seen what's happening sort of in the world and what's happening to brands. And so the creation of localized innovation in some of these markets is being put on hold because the bigger markets need to be serviced to keep the volume in those markets. You know, so you really don't get going forward this fantastic investment into innovation of brand and retail that you would ordinarily sort of 5 or 6 years ago.
I mean, digital is clearly having a transformative effect in terms of communication in consumers' lives. We haven't yet seen massive digital in-store. Do you think that's about to change?
I think that there'll be a sort of convergence and then a merge. I think that what we've seen is digital approach the consumer outside of the store, you know, whether that be through social media, through an app, through whatever is driving people to a certain place or driving them to a retailer. I think once they get to a store, what we're seeing is the kind of access points are being created. So whether that's digital couponing, whether it's image recognition, whatever is sort of combining those two areas is the entry point. I hope that we get to a point where, you know, augmented reality or a retailer builds an in-store experience around digital, but in a physical environment. So they piggyback off the physical infrastructure, but add a sort of digital layer to make that experience a bit better. But so far, we really haven't seen anything that is in that, you know, creating in-store theater, pushing people to physical bricks and mortar. We've almost seen it as a challenge between e-retail and physical, which I think is incorrect. I mean, certainly from a brand's perspective.
Well, Mike Smollen, the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer for Smollen's, thanks very much, Steve, for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here as always.
Seven years ago, we did our very first country ranking, and that was China. Since then, we have done India, Indonesia, Latin America, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. And that's done on an annual basis. 2017 brings the country rankings to another dimension. Another 6 individual countries will be included in 2017. Spain, Italy, France, Germany, UK, and the USA. Stay tuned and keep watching the BrandZ website for an announcement of when each of those individual rankings will be launched. And make sure that you have installed on your mobile device the BrandZ app, because the moment that the rankings are released, that data will magically appear on your app. Keep watching. Well, we've almost come to the end of the live web broadcast from our studio here in London for the BrandZ Top 100 Most Valuable Global Brands for 2017. As I said earlier, everything that you've seen plus a whole host more material is available to you to download from the URL here. And what I suggest you do is take a quick picture and you can download at your leisure. There's a whole host of material which I hope that you will share with your teams and, most importantly, your clients as well. We'll also be writing to you and letting you know how you can get access to the Elixir app for the BrandZ data, and also how you can get access to the bot, which will be launching in a month or so's time. Well, on behalf of WPP, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for watching today's broadcast and invite you to download this full report of the 2017 BrandZ rankings. It's 300 pages plus, absolutely crammed, packed full of insights, not just from the BrandZ team, but also from the brand experts around the WPP group in all of our companies across the world. And there you'll be able to see and understand some of the key insights and developments that we think are going to impact the world of marketing and the world of brands for the next few years. And you can download that from BrandZ.com. Well, on behalf of WPP, thank you very much indeed for watching. A big thank you to all of the people that's made this webcast possible. This broadcast is the last broadcast of the day. We've literally reached thousands of WPP colleagues around the world and clients. And from me, David Roth, from our live studio here in London, thank you very much indeed. And a big thanks to all the peoples whose name is on the screen following for all their help. Have a great day.